Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to our home battery storage webinar. I am Belinda Wiley, team leader of the sustainability team here at Hobsons Bay City Council. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on batteries. If you already have rooftop solar and are considering home battery storage, then this is the event for you. It's presented by energy experts Renew on behalf of the Western Alliance for Greenhouse Action Councils. These include Brimbank, Maribyrnong, Melton, Moonee Valley, Hobsons Bay and Wyndham. I'll start the evening with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the sovereignty of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people on whose unceded lands I am working today. I acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past and present. As someone who works in sustainability, I deeply appreciate their ongoing care for country and custodianship of our lands, waters and skies since time immemorial. And now to this evening's topic. So in terms of energy efficiency and generating my own power, I have a fair amount of personal experience with rooftop solar, but I don't have any experience with batteries. I do know that they haven't always stacked up in terms of the financial benefits in the domestic setting, and I'm very interested to hear tonight whether that has changed over the last year or two since I was looking into them. Many more of us with rooftop solar are now looking at batteries as an option to use more of the power that we're generating during the day. So particularly if you generate more power than you can use, particularly during summertime, you might now be considering how to store that power so that you can continue to use it when the sun goes down. And our energy expert and presenter, Dean Lombard, will be running through batteries in a lot of detail, so you can really work out whether it stacks up for you and your home. Okay, so now I'll introduce Dean to you, Dean Lombard. Dean is a former social worker and an energy specialist who's worked on issues such as energy efficiency, fuel choice, consumer protections, hardship assistance, and community energy projects. He's interested in helping people and communities take control of their energy needs and make the system work for them. So I will hand over to Dean now and turn off my own camera and mic, and I'll see you all for the Q&A. Thanks very much, Dean.
Thanks, Belinda, and thanks to everyone for coming. It's good to, well, I can't see you all, but to know that you're there. And great intro, Belinda. So we'll go right into the whole what you want to know, need to know, what's useful for you to know about batteries, and whether you can work out whether they're right for you, which is always a difficult question. And we'll get into the complexity of that, but we'll also point you towards ways that you can find out, because that's what we really need when we're trying to get into stuff like this, is we need to have a way to understand how can this work for me and my household, find out whether it does and what the best way to go about it is. So what I'm going to cover, I'm going to do a basic refresher on solar and how it works. I know that most of you probably have got solar because that's sort of why you're interested in batteries, but there's often a few people who don't. And even if you do, a lot of people, it's good to have a little refresher about solar, because the way solar and batteries interact is really important. So we'll look at, the basics of solar for a few minutes, then why you might want a battery, how does the battery work, and what you need to know when you're buying a solar and or a battery system. On the how the batteries work thing, I just want to be clear, I'm not a chemical engineer or anyone with massively deep expertise into the insides and the chemical sort of stuff of batteries. And you actually don't need to know that stuff to understand how batteries work for you. So we'll be looking at key characteristics of batteries. And if you're interested in a lot of the more technical stuff about how the chemical processes actually work, that's a good thing that you can search for on the internet. While I'm doing this, please put your questions in the Q&A. I always, maybe forget one or two things, or don't explain something clearly, or haven't thought of something that you might want to know. So do put your question in the Q&A. I'll do my best to answer the questions at the end. If there's a question I can't answer, then we'll take a note and we'll share that, or we'll give you some suggestions as to where to get the answer from. So we'll move on to it. And yeah, we're going to go for about 40-ish minutes, and then we'll do the Q&A. Before we get into it, I always like to start with, all this stuff about solar batteries and how we're using electricity. A lot of it is around, emissions, and a lot of people are interested in, how can I use more renewable energy and reduce my emissions. But a lot of it's also about costs. The reason a lot of people buy solar is because they can actually get cheaper energy that way, and it can actually protect them from the impacts of volatile pricing in energy. So I always like to remind people that the energy market that we have here in Victoria and in Australia is a bit nuts. It's got zillions of different sort of private companies trying to get their little piece of the pie wherever they can. You and the house next door to you might use exactly the same electricity. You might use the same amount, and you're certainly using the exact same, stuff from the exact same wire, but you might have different retailers and pay vastly different prices because price has no relation to quality of electricity in our market. If energy bills are a bit tough, it's always good to go to the Victorian Energy Compare website. There's a URL there, and Doug, and when I mention web addresses, Doug, our technical support guy, will put the links in the chat. It's always good to go here. You can put in a bit of information. You can look at what different energy retailers would be charging you for the amount of electricity that you actually use, and you can see who's cheaper and who's more expensive. Because there's never an easy question to answer. It depends on your usage, whether someone's cheaper or more expensive because of the way tariffs work. So yeah, it's a hard thing to work out by yourself, but this Victoria Energy Compare, it's run by the Victorian government. It's not associated or affiliated with any companies. It'll give you actually the honest calculation of, what the price will be for you on different offers. It's really good to get into that. There's lots of private comparator sites, and I don't normally recommend any of them because they usually operate with, what do you call it? They get paid by companies to sort of promote their company in their results. I do, however, recommend as a trusted site this one called Whatever. They are a commercial site. They do get commissions, but they've got a strong commitment to show all energy offers, not just the ones they get commissions for. And look, Victoria Energy Compare does as good a job, and I normally recommend that most, but the good thing that Whatever has, which can be useful, is when you put in your electricity information and you choose an offer, you can also use the site to estimate how much value you would get by adding solar panels or a battery to your house. And that can be useful information sometimes. You can also search specifically for green power offers. So that's a useful one to check about, especially their little solar battery estimate of how it would affect your bill is pretty useful. The other thing I like to say is that the energy that we use, we don't use electricity for the sake of it. We use it to do things for us, like, operate our radio, our computer, our television, heat our house, maybe cook, whatever, heat our water, depending on if you've got gas, electricity. The way that your house performs in terms of heating and cooling, because heating and cooling is the biggest use of energy in houses in most parts of Victoria, the way that your house performs in terms of keeping heat in the house during winter and keeping it out of the house in the summer has a huge impact on how much energy you use. So if you're doing anything to do with electricity or gas usage, it's always good to make sure first, if you own a home, that you've got insulation in the ceiling and other sort of, done some draft proofing, et cetera, to make your house perform better at keeping temperature constant and stable inside the house. It means that you use your heater less, your air conditioner less, you use less electricity, and that can change your whole sort of calculation for, how much do I want to invest to lower my energy bill. So always good to think about efficiency first. And, the libraries in, I think, most or all of the councils in the WAGA sort of group, so Hobsons Bay, Maribyrnong and Brimbank and et cetera, you can borrow energy efficiency assessment kits that have got instructions you can use yourself to check out your insulation and, check energy usage of your appliance and stuff like that. So highly recommend that you do that. It's a really important and often underthought about aspect of managing your energy bills. Anyway, that's a little intro. I'll do a quick refresher on solar, and I'll try to go through this pretty quickly so that we've got more time to talk about batteries. Basically, having solar panels on your roof is the number one way, the most cost-effective way that you can reduce the emissions usage of your house's energy use. Little aside, the concept of the carbon footprint, how much carbon emissions our energy use creates is pretty well known, and people often take big steps to reduce their carbon footprint. It's good to remember that the whole concept of the carbon footprint was developed by a coalition of oil companies who wanted to basically try and shift the blame for pollution and emissions from the massive companies that make their money from oil and coal to the people who are using it. We don't really have much choice. We need to use electricity some way or another. It's a shame that our usage creates carbon emissions. There's not a lot we can do about it. There's a bit we can do about it, but it's actually not our fault. So we do what we can. And one of those things that we do what we can, if you can, is to put solar panels on our house. And the solar electricity that you use from your panels actually replaces power in the grid, which a lot of the time reduces emissions. Sometimes it replaces renewable energy as well. It's actually pretty complicated to work out exactly how much emissions your solar panels save, but they generally do save a lot of emissions, and especially because they're right at the point of use, so there's less loss through transmission distribution wires. And of course, any solar generation that you don't use is exported back to the grid. That offsets other people's emissions. So it does have a big impact. It's good. It's close to home, and some people worry about, well, how much emissions does it take to make solar panels? Look, there's more and more emission-free energy in the whole system anyway, but the energy used to make your solar panels is generated by them within the first year or two of them being in use. So they quickly make up the energy they took to make, and then more. So yeah, solar panels are different to the solar hot water that you might know of. It's a different way of using the light and the sun to make energy. And yeah, 1 in 3 homes in Australia have solar PV now. And in Victoria, almost half of the homes that are suitable for solar have it. It's getting more and more, and it's continuing to grow. Most solar households get a pretty good return on their investment. And batteries are still not that common, but they're increasingly becoming common. Earlier this year, I got this number that 1 in 7 new solar installations have batteries. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a bit higher now, because it's continuing to increase. How your solar system basically works is the light hits the panels. Solar panels are called photovoltaic. They turn light into electricity. So light on the panels makes electricity. It goes down into your inverter, which is this box on the side, and the inverter sends the power to the switchboard, which is where all your house circuits are connected. And then the appliances that you use in the house, they draw the power from the switchboard. It's coming from the inverter because it comes there first. If you're generating more than you're using, anything extra goes out to the grid. If you're using more than you're generating, then you'll top up what you're using from your solar panels from the grid, but you use it from your solar panels first. Sometimes people look at their bills and they see the amount they get for the feed-in tariff, which is what you get when you export to the grid, and they think that that's the benefit they get from their solar, but it's not just that. In fact, that's a smaller part of the benefit. The biggest benefit is that using the solar energy that you generate yourself. And yeah, that energy goes back into the grid. It's used by your neighbours. Your energy retailer basically gets to use that. They get credited by the energy market system for that electricity that you put back in. That's why they pay for it. And in Victoria, they're required to pay you. In some states, they don't have to. And that's called the feed-in tariff. A lot of people feel it's quite unfair that the feed-in tariff is low, and it's now down to a bit over 3 cents. It's been getting lower and lower. A lot of people are a bit annoyed how, they get paid so much less, but it does sort of work out, because the minimum regulated feed-in tariff in Victoria is actually based on the cost that it would otherwise cost a retailer to buy that energy from the market and have it moved over the distribution lines to the house. So it looks wrong because, you pay 25 or 30 cents for electricity and you get 3 cents for it. But the fact is, in the middle of the day, the wholesale price for electricity is very, very low. It's often negative, and it's much more expensive in the peak period in the late afternoon and evening, and the price that you normally pay to get electricity from your retailer is actually averaged over the whole price over the day and over the year. So the feed-in tariffs, this has changed over time. When solar panels are relatively new and they were much more expensive, there was this massive feed-in tariff of 60 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's changed over time. It went down to 25 cents and it went down to whatever, the same as your retail price. And since 2013, it's been set by the Victorian Energy Regulator based on actually how much, like I said, how much it would otherwise cost a retailer to buy that electricity in the wholesale market and send it to the customer. Currently in Victoria, every year they set the price based on market prices over the last 12 months. Currently it's 3.3 cents, which is pretty low. A lot of energy retailers actually have higher ones. So you can look out for that when you're looking, say, in Victoria Energy Compare at energy retailers. Be mindful, though, that a lot of retailers that have high feed-in tariffs also have higher prices for the energy that they sell you. So it's good to try and get a handle on your usage and know, do I mostly use my solar? Do I have how much solar exports do I have compared to how much I buy, and work out what's best for you? Because that can really make a difference. There is also a time variant feed-in tariff, which is it basically pays different amounts at different times of day to reflect that change in price of electricity in the wholesale market across the day. And so in the time variant feed-in tariff is between 2 cents and sort of 8.5 cents. So it'll be 8.5 cents sort of later in the afternoon when the peak period is starting to happen. It will be 2 cents in the middle of the day when there's usually a surplus of solar energy already in the grid. And I think it seems pretty clear to me. I think that in the relatively near future, all feed-in tariffs will be time variant because the market is sort of moving towards having to move pricing with the way that pricing changes across the day to get better value from renewable energy installations. So that's one thing to look out for. And another thing to keep in mind with solar exports is that there's usually a limit on how much you can export at any one time. And the network sets that, and it's basically to manage solar exports because the more solar panels you have in the system, that can put sort of pressure on the grid that's not always built to handle that much electricity, especially as solar systems get bigger and bigger. So yeah, they usually have this sort of fixed limit. It's usually about 5 kilowatts, which is, kilowatts is like the instantaneous, the amount of energy that the solar system can actually export at one time. That's the minimum. I'll explain the difference between kilowatts and kilowatt hours a little bit later. But basically, the size of solar systems are measured in kilowatts, and that's how much the panels can actually generate at once. 5 used to be a pretty standard size for systems. Now it's more like 6 or 7. As solar gets cheaper, it gets bigger. So yeah, fixed export limits, usually 5. The annual impact from most solar systems is normally pretty modest because they really, a 5 kilowatt solar system only produces 5 kilowatts in the optimal conditions. And most of the time there's some use in the house from that as well. So analysis that Renew has done shows that export limits don't generally affect the economics of solar systems that much unless they're really, 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 really low. Now, there is currently a movement towards flexible export limits where the export limit changes at different times of day. And again, like the flexible pricing I was talking about before, that reflects basically different amounts of solar generation and congestion in the network from it at different times of day. Now, already in South Australia, they've got these what they call dynamic export limits. They'll be in Victoria soon. as well. You know, all the Victorian networks are looking at doing it because it actually lets them manage the system better, and it actually lets more solar be installed. Because for most of the time, when you run a dynamic limit, and this is what they're doing in South Australia, the limit is 10 kilowatts most of the time. That's double the normal limit because most of the time there's lots of spare capacity. And with the dynamic limits, they just move the limit down at the relatively small number of times when it becomes really congested. And that's often, for example, in sort of in between seasons when it's sunny but not too hot. So there's not so much air conditioning, but there's lots of generation. There's certain times when just the weather circumstances create this environment where there's lots of extra solar generation, but not so much usage. So they will put the limit down during those times. It's a bit like a speed limit. You have to reduce it for roadworks, which is the an analogy we've used sort of here. And yeah, the thing about these export limits, if you've got a big solar system, it's actually great because most of the time you'll be able to export more. And like I said, it enables more solar systems installed around everywhere. We expect to see them, more and more of them in the coming years. So when you've got solar, because of all these things, because of, it generates most in the middle of the day and export limits are likely to come in the middle of the day if needed, because that's when lots of people are exporting. You really get the biggest value from your solar system by trying to use more electricity when the sun is shining and when the panels are generating, and using whatever you can to shift that consumption, such as running appliances during the daytime. A lot of modern appliances have timers that you can set, or if you're home during the day, you can do that. You heating hot water, if you've got electric hot water, using that during the day. And a lot of hot water systems can be on timers so that you can time it with the solar generation. If your house is well insulated and you can, most, say, reverse cycle air conditioners can be timed to come on and off at certain times. If your house is well insulated, you can actually use those to come on in the middle of the day. Even if you're not home, you can time them so they come on for a few hours in the middle of the day to heat the house, to cool the house. And if the house is well insulated, you'll actually keep, it'll stay warm and it'll still be warm when you get home. So you need to use less heating and less cooling for the evening because you've warmed up the house or cooled the house during this time when your solar is generating and you got it for free. So that works very well. And these are all ways that you can basically try and shift your usage into the middle of the day. Again, especially an issue for people who are not home during the day. The more electric appliances you have, the more you can use your solar system. Like if you can shift some of your gas appliances to be electric, then you've basically got, you can't run your gas appliances off your solar panels, but you can your electric vehicles. You can charge them during the day if they're home during the day. And of course, getting a battery. And that sort of leads us on to the next part of our presentation, which is batteries and what we need to know about them. And now I can't find my mouse. I'm just looking for it. There it is. So why get a battery? Well, we've already touched a bit on why get a battery, because you can use them to catch some of that solar energy during the day. And this down here is all the reasons that we've come across with people who want to get batteries. And the number one really is to get better value from their solar system. Generates during the day. Maybe I'm not home. Maybe I'm not using very much. Store my excess in the battery instead of exporting it for the small feed-in tariff. And then later on, when the sun's going down and my solar's stopping to generate, I can use that energy from my battery instead of buying it from the grid. And that's good for me because it's cheaper and I'm getting more value by using my energy than by selling it for the feed-in tariff. If you're on tariffs that have a higher price in the peak, and more people are, and more people will be, because that's the direction everything's going, you'll save even more, because if you use your battery during those expensive peak periods, you're getting even more value from it. Tariff arbitrage is an extension of that, where people will actually even say, buy electricity from the grid in the middle of the day when it's cheap, store it in the battery, export it back out in the evening when you get those higher variable feed-in tariffs. That's what you can do if you're really keen to run your little electricity money-making venture. A lot of people like batteries to keep electricity on during a blackout or, a storm damage when the power's out, especially people who live in areas where storms are more common and outages are more common, such as out in Gippsland right now as we speak after the storms that we've had. Um, Important issue, which I'll touch on again later, if you get a battery to use so that you've got electricity during an outage, you have to make sure that you've got your solar and battery system installed and set up the right way to allow it, because the default way to install them usually it isn't set up in the way to keep power on during a blackout. Normally, solar has to have the grid going for it to work, and if there's a blackout, it normally switches off, and that's just about the way systems are set up. You can set them up so that they keep going with the battery, but you need to get them set up a special way, and it usually costs a little bit more to get your solar and inverter and battery to be set up that way. But for people who have a really compelling need to avoid outages at all costs, or who live in areas with lots of outages, it's often worth it. Sometimes people like batteries just because their grid issue, even if they don't have outages, it might be unreliable. They might get voltage spikes or low voltage or high voltage. That's a reason people have batteries, to basically help them to moderate and keep their electricity supply within the parameters that they want it to be. That is often issues for people who've got special equipment that is more sensitive to variation in sort of voltage and current of electricity. For some people, it's really just about energy independence. They don't want to be reliant on energy companies as much as they can. Some people, they just want to support the development of new technology. The more people that use this new technology, the more, the price will come down and the more ubiquitous it comes. That absolutely happened with solar panels at the beginning, in like the late 90s and early 2000s. There was, very, very few people had solar panels. That cost a fortune, but people were really wanting to, be first on the technology. And because of those people early adopting, they helped the market build up to the volume where they could actually bring down prices and sort of finance more technological advances. So yeah, if you're really into supporting new technology, that can be a great motivation for having a battery as well, because the more batteries there are, the more batteries there will be. And yeah, go off grid, probably less of a reason for people in sort of Western Melbourne than for people maybe in more regional areas. But there are some people who've gone off grid in the city. It's not really worth it economically in the city, but some people like to do it anyway because they want that sort of independence. Couple of big questions that people ask about batteries. One is about what's their sustainability or sort of emissions sort of benefit, and one is what's their sort of economic sort of benefit. So we'll look at these in turn. In terms of emissions benefit, home batteries sort of have really only a small to moderate environmental benefit. And I'll explain why, because batteries don't actually reduce emissions in themselves. Batteries don't create electricity. They get charged up by another electricity source. So if you've got solar panels, that's reducing your emissions. If you put that into your battery, that's not really reducing any more emissions. In fact, there's a few losses when you cycle electricity through battery and out again. So it's not necessarily reducing emissions further. If you weren't saving your solar in your battery, it would be going out to the grid and used by your neighbours, so the emissions reduction would still be there. But there's a few caveats to this, and one is if you do have solar exports limited, like we talked about before, and otherwise the energy couldn't be exported, then saving it in the battery, that would be helping to reduce more emissions, because otherwise it wouldn't be usable to do that. So that's one way that batteries do help reduce emissions, if you're using it to avoid your exports being throttled. Increasingly, there's this other factor, which is why I say small to moderate benefit and not no benefit, which we used to say a few years ago, is nowadays the peak periods, during the busy peak periods in the afternoon, that's usually when all the fossil fuel generators come on. They're increasingly not on during the day because of so much solar and wind, but they all come on during the peak periods. So if your battery has stored energy, so if your solar was generating in the middle of the day, if it was exporting, it might just be replacing other renewable energy and not saving emissions at all. But if you store it and then you use it during the peak period, that would be replacing emissions intensive energy So because of the way that our energy systems change, so it's basically dirtier in the peak periods and cleaner in the in-between periods, that's another way that your battery can help to reduce emissions. And there's another one which I'll touch on in a bit more detail shortly, which is that if you can actually use your battery in ways, things called virtual power plants, which I'll explain in a little bit. You might have heard of them, but this is a way that batteries are used not for the energy value of the stored energy, but to help stabilize the whole energy system with these things called ancillary services that help to smooth out the constant changes that are happening in the energy system. And using batteries for this actually replaces gas-powered generators that were previously used for these ancillary services. So that's another way. If that's a bit too hard to understand, I will explain about virtual power plants in a little bit. So yeah, so there are these small ways that batteries do have this emissions reduction benefit. But there's a couple of bigger, longer term issues, which is basically, like I've sort of touched on already, the more that people do sort of use these new technologies, the more you help grow the industry, the more you bring prices down of batteries, and the more it supports broader uptake of sustainable energy technology. And, ultimately, when you look at what we need to do to have a 100% renewable grid, you need batteries everywhere in the end to do that, because as we know, renewable energy generation like solar and wind generates more sometimes and less or none at all at other times. You need lots of batteries and storage to shift energy around when it's needed. So we simply cannot have a 100% renewable grid without batteries. So yeah, so even if the current emissions benefit is limited, the future is much bigger. And, we're buying stuff for the future. We're all trying to make a better world together, hey? The economics of the battery, as in terms of, is it worth it? Will it save you money? It's really hard to give a single answer in a sort of webinar like this, because it really depends on so many variables. There's all these dynamics in it, right? Like if you store your unneeded solar instead of exporting it and then use it later, that does reduce your energy bills. Because you would have got 3 cents or 4 cents if you had have exported it, but you're saving 20 or 30 or 40 or even 50 cents if you're on a time variant tariff if you use it later. So it definitely reduces your energy bills. That's undeniable. But the big question is the saving bigger than the cost of the battery? And that's what trips some people up. Some people look at the energy bill saving that they will get, and often battery installation companies and retailers will show, oh, look, you'll get your bills down to $30 a quarter sort of thing. Just because you get an energy bill saving doesn't mean that the sum of savings over the life of the battery will add up to the considerable amount of money you spend on the battery. It might, or it might not. It depends on lots of reasons. So you need to do, so what with solar, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Look, get solar, you're going to come out ahead pretty much in almost every situation. Batteries, it depends. You really need to do more work or get some help to figure out if it's right for you. That said, it's way better now already than it was a few years ago, and it's continuing to get better as energy prices go up and battery prices come down. And, appliances get more efficient, that sort of stuff. So it's definitely improving. When we first started doing these economic assessments, we basically found no batteries would get a 10-year payback, because 10 years is considered the lifespan of them. We would never find a 10-year payback on a battery. More recently, we see it sometimes. And like I said, it's going to get more and more as we go into the future. But you can't assume that it will, or you can't assume whether it will or will not work for you. You really have to do some more assessment, and we'll get into a bit of how you do that in a bit. Because the specific situations that make a difference are, what is your electricity usage like? What sort of tariffs are you on or available to you? Will you participate in a virtual power plant, and that might give you some price benefits, or do you get the battery for a discount, which changes the upfront cost, which makes it easier to get payback? In general, if you've got large energy usage, a battery is more likely to make economic sense for you. If you're on a time use tariff, it's more likely to, because you can do that thing of, say, replacing buying more expensive energy in the afternoon. If you've got lots of excess solar, or there's a whole lot of solar excess that you can't export, it's more likely to make sense for you economically. And if you can't shift your usage from the evening to the day, it will make the battery make a bit more sense for you. If you need to power your home during outages, it'll make a heap of sense for you, even if it's not just the economic payback, because, we often look a lot about the economic payback, like will I save more than I spend? Because that's a good metric to understand what a thing is costing us. But there are reasons beyond saving money that people get batteries. So, if you have a real need to power your home during an outage and you work out that, I won't get payback from a battery, but I can work out how much it will cost me over the 10 years. You say the battery cost me $10,000 and I'm going to save $8,000, for example. I'm just making these numbers up. That means it's going to cost me $2,000 to have this battery for 10 years. But is that a good price to pay for being able to be powered when there's an outage? Maybe that is. It's $200 a year. That might be really worth it if you live in an area where there's lots of outages. So see, there's lots of different. It's good to know when you invest in technology like this, what do I want from what am I valuing from this technology? What's the most important thing for me? Is it saving money? Is it having power when there's an outage? Is it something else? That helps you work out work out how the cost and the benefit works for you. So how does it work? There's lots of different ways to connect batteries. So I won't go into all that because it sort of doesn't matter in the end. It depends on what battery you got, how it's connected. Essentially, if you go back to our little diagram, the difference when you've got a battery is that your solar system generates electricity and it goes into your inverter. And that, of course, goes into your appliances that are being used at the time. But after that, if your appliance is running and there's still extra generation, instead of going to the grid, it goes to the battery instead. And then only when the battery is full does it go back to the grid. And then, as we said before, if you're using, so that's when you're using less than you're generating. Anytime you're using more than you're generating, the electricity will come, like in the default way to set these up, the electricity will come from the battery first instead of the grid. And you can actually set it up different ways. For example, if you're on a time of use tariff with a low cost in the middle of the day, you might tell your battery, well, don't discharge into the house if I need extra during the day, save it until the evening, then discharge. So you can set up in different ways, but basically the typical way is when you're not using your appliance, when you're not using the generation, it's going to the battery. And when you are needing more than your generation or your generation stopped, you take it from the battery before the grid. And if you have an outage, and your system is set up to work in an outage, the system stays within the house. You generate, you store, you use. You normally can't have an outage protection without a battery because if the sun goes behind a cloud and the generation drops to nothing for 30 seconds, that can have, you'd lose complete power and everyone will come back on again. It just doesn't really work because of the variability of generation. That's why you generally need a battery when you have an off-grid capable system or an outage capable system so that you can sort of smooth out the electricity. Move my little laser pointer out of the way. And yeah, a good way to think about this is a typical energy usage. This is how much electricity you use. This is for the typical sort of old way of life where we all left the house all day and came back in the evening. Of course, many people never lived like that. Many people work at different hours, or they might have people who stay at home with young children or whatever. They might work from home. More of us work from home now, but most energy usage patterns are a variety of this. Even if you're home during the day and work from home, you'll probably find that your usage during the middle of the day is lower than your morning and sort of evening time, because this is when we're like boiling kettles and making tea and cooking breakfast and maybe heating up the house and, and this is when we're sort of cooking dinner and, heating up the house again. And you might find that, usage in the middle of the day normally is a bit lower. If you got solar, the solar generation is almost opposite this stereotypical pattern, right? And in here, there's none when you need it, and here there's lots of generation when you don't need it. This is when you're exporting. Um, this is where the battery comes in, because we take some of this excess and we put in the battery until the battery's full. And then if the battery's full, then we still export some. But this is where that stored battery takes off our own peak usage. We use some of that in the morning, in the evening, maybe overnight from the battery. That's the basic thing of how it works. The other way of using a battery is this thing I mentioned called a virtual power plant. This is when you basically sign up with a company that lots of other people are signed up with, and they pay you in one of many different ways. They might have given you a discount to buy the battery. They may pay you for each time they use a battery. They may pay you an annual or monthly amount. Depends on the company and how their business model works. But basically, they pay you somehow in order to have a certain amount of usage of your battery. And the details of how much usage they would have of your battery is in the contract that you sign with them. And the main thing these virtual power plants do is provide these special support services to the grid. Because what happens, the energy usage in the community is always changing. Like big factories are switching on and off machines, and people are turning on and off things, etc. You would have heard old stories about, back in the old days, in commercial breaks, power will go up when everyone got up to boil a kettle sort of thing. This sort of thing happens all the time in the energy system. And every time the usage changes in the system, stuff has to happen in the system to keep it balanced and to keep the frequency and voltage correct. And there's normally these special gas-powered power stations that basically get a signal and come on whenever that instability happens. They'll switch on for like 10 seconds or 20 seconds or maybe a minute to inject a bit extra energy into the system in order to help stabilize the system. Then they switch off again. And there's other sort of things that will, there's other ones that are not power stations that will use electricity from the system if they need extra usage. Like if a big load turns up, they need to use extra electricity for like 10 or 20 seconds in order to give time to the system to stabilize. So this is basically what a virtual power plant replaces. If without a virtual power plant, this gas power station comes on and off numerous times during the day to stabilize the energy system. But with a virtual power plant, where all these households with batteries are signed up to this aggregator, they get the signal and they can switch on even faster than the gas power plant, and they pull a bit of energy out of your battery and stick it into the system, and that stabilizes the system. And that's why they sort of pay you. They say, if you're signed up to us, well, we'll use a little bit of your battery, but we'll pay you, and we're doing this benefit to the system, and you're earning this extra money from the battery. So that's what a virtual power plant is. That's a really simple explanation, and I hope it was simple and it made sense. If you Google virtual power plant, you'll probably find more detailed explanations that probably make a bit more sense. But this is one of the things you can do with batteries, apart from just using it in your house to, support your own usage. And for some people who want to get a battery, but who maybe have lower energy use, a VPP might be a way they get more financial value from their battery than their own use of it. Again, it depends on how much battery costs, how much you spend, how much you would use it, etc., etc. The other thing I want to talk about batteries, and now I'm moving into when you're sort of buying a battery, what are you looking at? Is that batteries come in different sizes, just like batteries that we put in our torches or whatever. Yeah, they all come in different sizes. And when you're buying a battery to use at home, you'll be looking at how much solar do I export? Therefore, how much spare energy do I have to charge my battery? And you'll be looking at how much energy do I use in the evening and overnight. So that's how much I might want to have in my battery. And you'll use those numbers to work out what size battery you want. When you look at batteries, they come in small sizes like 2 kilowatt hours or 3 kilowatt hours or 5 or 8 or 13.5, for example, all different amounts. And what you really need to know, and is not always clear, is that the capacity of the battery, the rated capacity, is not the actual usable capacity. All batteries have a certain amount of the electricity that they can produce that can't be used, but that it just stays in the battery all the time. And this is an example, and it's fairly typical, but there is a bit of movement. Like, this example is a 10 kilowatt hour battery. That means that that's how much energy it stores. You can use 1 kilo, say 5 kilowatts for 2 hours. That's 10 kilowatt hours. But you can actually only use 4 because there's 2 kilowatt hours that are never discharged from the battery. So the usable capacity is only 8. Now, that's not a rule of thumb that it's that percentage, but every battery, if you look at the specifications, it always, by law, it has to say what the usable capacity is and if that's different from the rated capacity. The rated capacity is what they use to sell a battery. This is our 10 kilowatt hour battery. But actually, you look at the sheet and it goes, well, you can use 8 of the kilowatt hours. So that's really important to know when you're shopping for battery, to look at the usable capacity, not just the rated capacity. The other thing you need to know is the difference between the power and the energy rating. Energy is in kilowatt hours, power is in kilowatts. They sound the same. People get them mixed up all the time. The analogy I use is like a hose with water and a bucket, right? Power, or kilowatts, is like the water pressure. It comes out fast or it comes out slow. The energy is like the size of the bucket, right? So if you've got a high power hose, it'll fill up your 10-litre bucket really quick. If you've got a low power hose, low water pressure, it'll still fill up the bucket. It'll just take a bit longer. And we all know what it's like if we're, say, rinsing something off a dish or trying to hose a driveway. If you do that, sometimes you don't have enough power for what you need, and other times you do. Sometimes you want less power, sometimes you want more power. Every battery and every solar system has a rated power, which is how much it can put out instantaneously. How much pressure, high pressure, low pressure. And that's different for a battery, the amount that it can store. So for example, here's our same battery again. It's our 10 kilowatt hour battery, 2 kilowatt hours always stays in the battery. So we've only really got 8. And this battery has a rated power of 4 kilowatts. That means it can only put out 4 kilowatts at a time. So because it's 8 kilowatt hours, that means it can put out 4 kilowatts for 2 hours and then it's empty, right? 4 kilowatts, 2 hours is 8 kilowatt hours. You just multiply them together. That's important to know because if you want to power our appliances from the battery, the battery needs to have the power to power them. And think, for example, of, say, a heater, there might be, 500 watts, half a kilowatt. That might be a reverse cycle air conditioner. A bar radiator might be 1.8 kilowatts. A kettle or a hairdryer might be 1.8 or 2.6. So if you had a battery that could only do 2 kilowatts and you wanted to use a 2.6 kilowatt hairdryer, you couldn't run it off the battery because it's not enough power. So this is what we need to know when we get a battery. Can it put out the power that my appliances need? And you're going to add together the appliances you need to use at the time. This is part of what you do when you think about battery. And here's an example of battery specifications. It's pretty complicated. There's lots of stuff there. This is from, I think, the Solar Quotes website, which has got great information about batteries. And here's an example of see this nominal storage, usable capacity. That's what you've got to look at. See, this battery is 14 kilowatt hours, but the usable capacity is only 13.5. This one, it's the same. They call their battery by the usable capacity and not by some other number, right? This one, again, look, 13.34, but it's really 13.3. So that's where you look for usable capacity versus nominal, how it's named. And the other thing here is power. So there you go. So these batteries are all a similar size, right? 13, or sort of 13, 14, 13 kilowatt hour, pretty much. But they have different power, right? This one can only put out 5 kilowatts. This one can put out 7.5 kilowatts. And this one can normally put out 5 kilowatts, but for a limited period of time, it can put out 7 kilowatts. And that's why these batteries all store about the same, but they cost different because, this one's cheaper because it's lower power. This one's the most expensive because it's higher power. It's 7.6 kilowatts. This one's in between because it's normally lower power, but it can go higher when you need it. And often that's all you need for some appliances. So this is an example of, this is the information you want to look at when you get a battery. Look at the warranties as well, because, you want to make sure it's got a warranty, and you want to understand the warranty, because in the end, the dependable life of the battery is the time of the warranty. Here are some great resources for how to find out more about batteries. Renew magazine often has articles about batteries. The Clean Energy Council has an approved list of batteries that are approved to be installed in Australia. And yeah, that table of specs I got from Solar Quotes. It's great information about batteries and solar inverters and solar panels. There's also some battery price benchmarks at Solar Choice. That's good just to get a handle on what's the typical price for batteries, because you need more information as much as you can when you're buying stuff. I'll give you an example. I've got a few examples here of solar and battery payback. I won't spend too much time on this because we're sort of running out of time, and also it's a lot of detail, and you can't take it in unless you sit down with it for half an hour. But this is used in a solar calculator on the Solar Quotes website. And look, that Solar Choice website I mentioned also has calculators. There's a few of these online calculators that work out payback of solar and battery systems. This just sort of shows in some way that it's pretty complicated. Like, there's a lot of factors to consider: where the panels face, how big the battery is, what its power is, what your energy tariff is, how much the battery costs, how much of your solar you self-consume, so therefore you couldn't use while it's generating, and because only the amount that you export can you use to charge your battery. So there's lots of variables, and this different consumption in different times of year. These calculators, if you get into them and get the information in there, they can give you some good information. Like, I put in a few typical examples, and here was, I should go back to the lunch slide. This particular battery, it's like a 6 kilowatt hour battery with 6 kilowatts of panels. This sort of showed that, the whole system, solar and battery, pays back in about 10 years. Solar by itself will pay back in less time, but the payback on the battery is longer, because solar pays back much quicker than batteries. If you add batteries to a solar system, you actually increase the payback period, because the battery is a lot more expensive. That'll change slowly as prices get cheaper. But this is an example. You can see that, these bills that you get with this battery are pretty low. Right, $27 credit bill, $31 bill in autumn, compared to $300 if you didn't have solar, $120 if you did have solar. The battery really reduces the bill by quite a bit, but the cost of the battery is what ends up making it that it still takes over 10 years to pay back. And that's sort of a borderline case, most batteries will last that long. So that's like when we broke even, and we got the benefit of those low bills, and we got some of the other benefits of a battery, like, if we had the outage protection, for example. Here's another example of a bigger battery. Now, this is just a household that's got higher usage. They get a better payback because they got higher usage. All the other variables are the same, but they've got higher usage, and they now pay back in well under 10 years. This is a good deal for this household. They get the benefit of the battery, and they get the payback. So this is an example of how your usage makes a big difference. So they've actually got some higher bills than that previous household, but they're getting more financial benefit because their bills will be much, much higher without it. So you can go and play with those solar battery calculators for ages. It's good fun. And if you're thinking about getting a battery, I would use those to see to help you choose what to get, or use a helpful service, which we'll get to in a second. If you're buying a battery, you can get battery loans from the Victorian government. If you qualify, you've got to have a solar system already. It's got to be one of the approved batteries, and you have to agree to receive invitations to participate in virtual power plants, because the Victorian government's trying to help to get the virtual power plant industry started. You don't have to sign up to them. You just have to agree to get invited. So that's a small price to pay for getting a battery. You can get a loan of up to $8,800 for a battery. Depends on a few different ways of calculating. It depends on how much the battery costs, but worth looking at the Solar Victoria site if you want to get a battery, because you can get an interest-free loan So you're still paying the whole amount, but you get the interest-free loan. You can pay it back over 4 years. That actually helps you pay back out of the savings that you get from the battery. There used to be a rebate where they just gave you a discount, and now it's just the loans. Solar panels, you still get a rebate of about $1,400 plus a notes loan as well. And yeah, so if you think about a battery, think about how much a year you spend on energy, what types of major appliances you have, how much energy they use, how much power they need, all stuff that we touched on before. Absolutely think about your reasons having solar and battery, because that'll help you decide if if it's for you. Once you figure out what the economics are, then you figure out, is it, if there's a cost to me overall, is it worth the benefits for my reasons, my priorities for what I want a battery for. But a really important one is, how much excess solar do you have, and is it enough to fill up your battery? And then, is that how much you need after the sun goes down? Because if you have, I don't know, if you have sort of, an 8 kilowatt hour battery and you've got enough solar exports to divert to the battery to do that, but you only use 1 or 2 kilowatt hours overnight, you're not actually going to be able to use the benefit of your battery. And in households in that situation will get better value from a small battery, even though it doesn't do that much, because it's cheaper and they'll get to use it fully. So this is what I'm saying. You need to sit down and work out with those battery calculators. And if you can find, someone who's knowledgeable about batteries to help you work through your own data and information to work out if it works for you. Another really important one is, have you got a place to put it? Which is not always the case depending where you live. That's important too. And I'm getting to a moment in some of the installation rules that also limit where you can put them. So yeah, how do you find this information to help? It's hard, right? Here are some good links for you, and Doug's going to share these in the chat. Solar Victoria's Solar Hub is heaps of info telling you way more detail than I'm telling you now, but done in a way that's easy to understand. Renew helped to write a lot of the information that's up there. They've got heaps of information about solar batteries and what you need to look for. The New Energy Tech Consumer Code, which Renew was involved in setting up, is like a industry-based sort of best practice code of conduct for retailers of new energy tech products. And they've got these great consumer guides that, once again, that Renew helped to write, telling you lots of information what to look for. Choice has some good info about solar and batteries. Solar Quote's website has all these, what they call 101 guides. Great, basic, but very accurate and useful information about solar batteries, what to look for, what pitfalls to avoid, etc. I really recommend all of those resources. I would note that I'm actually going to get to them a bit later, but Hobsons Bay and a couple of the councils in the Western Melbourne, I think Maribyrnong as well, has this sort of solar savers program that also helps give you information, helps you make best decisions and find a good solar retailer, and gives you that independent advice that you really need in making these decisions. Solar and battery calculators are really useful, especially if you haven't got someone to help you work it out, because you can put in your details and you can try different variables and see what size solar, what size battery works for me and what's the financial benefit. So Solar Quotes has a good one. Solar Choice has a good one. There's one called Sunspot, which is done by the University of New South Wales. And Renew, if you're a bit techie and you like spreadsheets, Renew has its Sunulator solar calculator that is like a big Excel spreadsheet. That's a little complicated, but they've got some how-to videos how to use it. If you like to get deep and dirty in spreadsheets, that's a good one, because you can put in zillions of different options. And they're all good resources. There's a few more in the chat as well, such as the My Efficient Electric Home Facebook group, which is a great source of information for all this stuff. Pitfalls to avoid. If you want blackout backup, you've got to specify it, because it doesn't necessarily come with that by itself, by default. You have to say, I want my battery and solar system to give me power if there's a blackout or an outage. A common mistake a lot of people make is not saying that, and then being surprised when they have an outage that their system doesn't work because they didn't specify and pay a bit extra for the slightly more complicated system requirements. The second biggest one is that people didn't really work out, people got a backup capable system, but they didn't work out how big a battery they needed in order to last a few days with an outage. Or a day or whatever time they wanted. If you want outage backup, you're probably getting a bigger battery than what you would just need to use for, you saving a bit of peak energy. So think about how long you want to, if you do want to have blackout backup, think about how long do I need it for? In the city, it might only be a couple of hours, but if you're in a regional area, it might be a lot longer. Another thing is people not finding out properly off their energy network business that serves their area what limits are on the size of the inverter or the size of the system or the battery. Usually your retailer of the battery or solar system will do that for you. If they're signed up to that new energy tech consumer code, they have to, but sometimes they don't. So do find out from your network business like Gemini or PowerCore, whoever it is, if they have limits in your area on size of solar system, size of battery. I find that increasingly their web pages are more useful and they've got more useful people you can contact and talk to about these things because they're recognised and they have a role in helping people connect this stuff. There's also location issues. There's the Australian standard, which I'll get into next, but look out for a location that gets lots of sun will actually reduce the battery lifespan. It's better to be shaded. Some types of batteries need ventilation. Batteries in garages are vulnerable to being damaged by a car, and that can be both expensive but can also be dangerous. So again, the new Australian standard for location deals with some of this. Look out for the battery warranties. Some are better than others, and careful of tricky warranty conditions because some of them have them too. The Australian standard came in a couple of years ago. It was a bit controversial when it came in because some people thought it was sort of over cautious, but although the risk of battery fires is pretty low, if they do happen, they can be pretty full on and hard to get on top of. So that's why we have the safety rules for them. And, they have all these rules about, there needs to be non-combustible material behind the battery. It can't be installed within 60 centimetres of a door or window. There's lots more details. You have to put it in a place where if it does catch fire, it's not going to be an immediate risk. It's not going to trap people inside the house. And, these are new, and I snapped this photo on one of my dog walks. This battery installation here, that's not compliant with those rules. It was probably done before those rules came in, so it's allowed to be there. But you can see, it's under a roof. It's right next to the front door. It's right in, it's right against the wall. There's no proper non-combustible material behind it because that aluminium siding, I think it's aluminium, is not particularly fireproof. That's not a good installation. That's not a safe installation. So do keep in mind that the Australian standard will limit where you can locate the battery and that there's actually a good reason for that. Batteries are much more complex to work out than solar, which is why you really need to do the homework, understand your energy usage, figure out the power and the capacity that you need, get a sense of the economics of it. Even if you're not doing it to save money, it's good to know how much it will cost you to get the other things that you value. And if you use those calculators and try different configurations and see what works for you, you might be surprised what combination works right for you. And solar and batteries, their economics interact with each other. Retailers and installers, they're supposed to manage the whole deal and work out and do everything properly. I always recommend looking for an approved seller under the new Energy Tech Consumer Code. That's the retailers who sell the battery. They contract separately with installers. Installers are all accredited by the Clean Energy Council. Choosing a retailer, like I say, the NetCC approved sellers is a good starting point, but also talk to friends or neighbours, see if they can recommend anybody. Look at warranties. Good warranties often mean good installers. Get a few quotes. Get at least 3 quotes for the same battery. It's always good to do that. And like I mentioned before, Hobsons Bay and Maribyrnong have this Solar Savers program. Some other councils have that too. They'll give you heaps of advice and help you make a better choice. And really having that trusted expert advice while making your choice that's tailored towards your house is really helpful. There are a few cowboys in the industry, so you'd be looking for, do they come and check out the site for their quote? Can you ask them questions and can they answer them properly? Is their quote really clear? Do they clearly take responsibility for their work? Are they accredited? Will they be there? All this stuff is really important. They should give you a really clear picture of what the installation is going to be like. And if they're not giving you information that you want to know, that's usually a bit of a red flag. Last slide before we go to questions. Sorry, I've taken a bit longer than I meant to. There's a few different types of warranties. I've got 4 different types of warranties here. One is the performance. It's how well the battery will perform over the period of the warranty. Because batteries and solar panels do both degrade a bit over life, and it's to be expected. The performance warranty says by the end of the life, which is usually 25 years for solar and 10 years for battery, it'll still perform at this percentage of its original specification. That's what the performance warranty is. The product warranty covers premature failure or manufacturing faults. Again, batteries 5 to 10 years is pretty typical. The battery warranty might also use years and or cycles, how much it charges and discharges. Find out that and work out how many times am I going to cycle it, and that means how long will my warranty last. The installation warranty is for the installer or the solar retailer who does the installation, and that's about if there's a problem with the installation fault. They might also come out to diagnose problems and replace failed components if there's a product failure. So the installation warranty is also important. It's only useful if the installer's still around. It's a good sign of a good installer that they've got a good installation warranty. And solar inverter warranty specifically covers just the solar inverter. I always recommend look for 10 years. Some of them are lower, but 10 years, enough of them are 10. I think that's pretty good to look for. Okay, that's my presentation. I hope that was interesting and informative and I didn't ramble on too much. I'm sorry I took a bit longer than I meant to. Let's throw to the questions and hopefully we'll be able to get through them.
Thank you, Dean. That was marvellous. Okay. We have got a few questions here, and everyone just type your questions into the Q&A function as Dean's answering these first ones. So Ranulfo has a question about ROI, rate of return. I think you did cover this in some detail, Dean. So it was just a general question that he put in the chat fairly early on. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that ROI, or
what is the question?
Just how much is it?
How much is the ROI, the return on investment? Oh, look, that's where it depends. That's what I recommend those calculators for. They'll tell you the return on investment. So return on investment is basically, I spend all the money up front, I get a financial benefit. How much benefit do I get beyond what I paid? That's a return on investment. Solar panels generally have a good return on investment. Batteries can be, like I said, some of them don't really have a return on investment in terms of finance. Others do. It's usually a bit less than solar, but it's not the whole story because you also get in other things from the battery that you want, such as outage protection or emissions reduction if you want that. It's like, if you buy a car, you don't expect a return on investment. You expect that you're spending money and you're getting the benefit of driving the car. So for some people, the battery is like, well, I'm not trying to save money. I'm trying to get other things. And it's still good to do the ROI and the financial calculations so you can know how much it's costing you overall, because it costs you the upfront cost, less the amount of money that you save. In some cases, that's a positive saving. In some cases, it's still a negative and you're still having a net expenditure, but it might be worth it. I think it'd be worth it if a few $1,000s for 10 years of outage protection is probably worth it for a lot of people if they're in an area with lots of outage. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. A question about maintenance cost, annual maintenance cost. Just, is there any annual maintenance cost? How much will it be?
That is a good question, and I actually don't know the answer to that one. I'm sorry. I know most solar and battery retailers will have some sort of maintenance recommendations. They don't need lots of maintenance. It's really about making sure that they're clean and making sure there's no damage. Certainly with solar panels, they do recommend clean them every few years, or checking connections. It probably is a good idea to get them checked out. from time to time, an electrical appliance that lasts a long time like that. But yeah, I can't really answer that. What I'll do is I'll make a note to look that up and send it out with the email that comes out after this thing. 'Cause I think that's a good question. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
plus.
Great. Okay. Next question from Liz. If you get a battery, you still have to pay the property charge or service charge, do you not? Is that right?
So you're talking about the daily charge on your electricity bill.
That's what I'm assuming it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of how you pay for the cost of being connected to the network and to have a retail contract. People often think that service to property charge is just a network charge. It's not actually. It's, your bill comes from the retailer and the retailer decides we'll do this much as the daily charge, the service to property charge, and we'll do this much per kilowatt hour. And they basically balance that tariff the way that they want to get their own certainty of investment, a certainty of return. If you have an energy retailer, you're going to have that daily charge. If you disconnect from the grid altogether, you won't have it. But, that's not really cost effective for most people. And when you have solar and battery, even if you only use the grid 10% of the time, usually that 10% of the time is really important. And that's when that's why you want to stay connected to the grid. So, if you're connected to the grid, you got to pay that charge.
Yeah. Thank you. Question from Stefan. Does your household income get taken into account for the battery loan applicability? That I'd say is the Solar Vic.
Yeah, the Solar Vic, yes. And there's just a single household income threshold. So if your income is below the threshold, I think it's 210,000 household income, then you're eligible for it. As far as I know, that's the only that's the only criteria for income is that it's below that certain amount. As far as I know, they don't do like a credit check sort of thing because it's a special sort of government loan. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
That would be a question worth asking. If you are applying to the Vic government to the solar homes program for that loan, that's certainly a question to ask just to make sure. But I'm pretty sure I've never heard of it being an issue. It's a small loan scheme of things. It's not like a house loan.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Would a home battery affect one's home insurance due to the fire risk associated with it?
When the fire risk of home batteries is very low, but I expect that it would, I expect that your insurance company needs to know about it because they need to know about major changes like that. I actually don't know. I've never heard of people's insurance going up, but I actually don't know. And it's probably different with different insurance companies. I mean, it's good to be clear. They're not risky. They're not really risky. It's very, very, very low chance of anything happening with a battery unless they're maltreated and that, So if they're installed properly, they're pretty safe. Absolutely. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure about what different insurance companies might do. I wouldn't be surprised if some factor, because some insurance companies seem more than others to be enthusiastic to get whatever extra premiums they can. So could be a good time to find a better insurer.
Shop around, yeah, for sure. And Annette has a question about this too, around why have there been so many battery recalls with warnings of fire hazards? And this might be to do with the apartment building. I know there has been a little bit in the press around batteries in apartment buildings, for example.
Yeah, the ones I've heard of have mostly not been these type of batteries, but been like batteries in e-bikes. And I expect that's because I don't think the e-bike sort of industry is particularly well regulated at the moment. And people can buy stuff like that through various channels anyway. And also e-bikes are much more vulnerable to damage. I expect that. But I also think that, probably there's an impression, it's probably like a lot of things where they always get reported because they're a new technology. So we probably have a false impression of how many there are. It probably seems like a lot when maybe it's not as many in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, e-bikes are a different matter altogether. And certainly the advice with e-bikes is never to leave them charging when you're not with them.
Right. Okay.
But
Thank
yeah,
you.
But that's a very different issue to these type of home batteries. They're a completely different thing altogether.
Yeah,
Yes.
great. That is actually our last question on the list that we have in the Q&A tab. Someone said, oh, yes, that's a thank you coming through for Dean. I'm just thinking about whether I have one last question, maybe around the, and this may be a little too complicated or off topic, but I just thought if we've got a little bit of time, around community batteries and maybe just a quick rundown on what a community battery means.
Good question. Because we hear about these more and more, and they're getting built right around places. There's building one near me in West Footscray in a short amount of time. Look, I mentioned how your home battery, will use some of your solar instead of it being exported, and then you can use it again in your house later and save on your peak energy usage. Community batteries sort of work the same way, but for the area. You've got all these houses that are all exporting solar during the day when they're generating more than is being used. The community battery, might be owned by a network, might be owned by a local government, might be owned by a community group. It will store up some of that extra electricity that's in the wires because all these houses are exporting solar and it's more than what people are using. They basically save that. And then during the peak period, they put it back in the wires when everyone's drawing lots. And that means that there's less peak power being drawn down that sort of feeder, that wire, because the community battery is supplying the houses nearby it. So it basically works on a bigger scale as your home battery does. And these community batteries can also do that tariff arbitrage thing I talked about, where they might charge up a bit from cheap power in the middle of the day and put back into the grid during peak time, both to help meet the peak demand, but also to make money for the community battery so that helps to cover the cost of its operations. So it's still a new area. People are still working out the different business models for it. And that's why I said that, there's like who owns it. There's lots of different ways for owning it. And depending on who owns it, they can get different types of benefits from it. Networks are certainly looking at what they often call neighborhood batteries rather than community batteries, because they might own them. So it's not really community owned, but they're looking at batteries just to help them manage their network in the area, because they might have a network that, gets too much solar exports during the day and then gets massive peak draw at night. And in both cases, the wires are running really hot to try to pull all that power or send all that power, and a network-owned battery in that area can relieve both those problems and help to actually reduce their need to maybe upgrade equipment. Community battery can work the same as that. And some network businesses are working with community groups and local councils to sort of co-own and co-operate community batteries, so it meets those network needs, saves network costs, also helps to, smooth out, reduce more emissions, use more energy in the system, maybe raise some money for a community organisation or local government that owns the battery. So it's a fascinating topic. And if you go Googling and searching about it, you'll find lots of information about it.
Yeah, it's a complex one. It is a complex one. As you say, that we're working out different ways of using them and benefiting.
And like when I said earlier, when we were talking about the emissions benefit of batteries, I said that, the future 100% renewable grid will need a lot of batteries everywhere. A lot of those will be those community batteries. That's absolutely the way things are going. So in one sense, these community battery projects that are happening, like in the western suburbs here and in the northern suburbs and in some regional towns, now they're actually all some of that early adoption sort of energy that's helping to work out, okay, here's the battery, here's the piece of land it goes on. How do we use it? What works out best? What's the best way to use it? What's the best way to finance it? What's the best sort of ownership arrangements? Who can actually reap the benefit? What are the different types of benefits? How much does it actually save by, absorbing some of that peak load and excess solar? All this stuff is still being worked out. So it's a big part of the future. Great.
Thank you, Dean. Okay, so we've got no more questions have come through, so we'll move into our wrap-up phase now, everybody. Look, thank you all for being here. Thank you very much to our energy experts at Renew, particularly Dean, our presenter and energy expert, and Doug, who's kept us going in the background and helped us on the technical side. And thank you also to the Western Alliance for Greenhouse Action Councils for making this webinar possible. Any Hobsons Bay residents with us here today, please head to the Hobsons Bay website to learn more about a range of sustainability initiatives that we have running here at Council, including the Solar Savers program, which was mentioned by Dean. Solar Savers is a local government program we're participating in that makes it easier to install solar and batteries. We know that many residents and small businesses want solar panels, they want batteries, but they're put off by the complexities of choosing the right product and finding a credible installer. And the intention of the Solar Savers program is to help make installation easy and reliable for residents and businesses. You can make use of the program, which is provided at no cost to you as a resident. And I know Maribyrnong is also a member of Solar Savers. The Solar Savers team will help you find a suitable product and a trusted installer. They'll check those government rebates, so they will check things like, the income testing, etc. And they'll provide free support throughout. So Doug might have put that link in the chat earlier, and if you wouldn't mind popping it in there, Doug, the Solar Savers, Hobsons Bay Solar Savers and Electrification link. You'll also find information on our website about the Hobsons Bay Response to Climate Change Action Plan, which will take you through other specific actions that Council is taking to reduce emissions, to mitigate the impacts of climate change, and to ensure that our communities are as prepared for those impacts as possible. And if you're a resident of another municipality, your council will absolutely have a similar page on their website full of resources, information about rebates, and a lot of other support. Okay, so that's us, folks. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you again soon.